Hey, everybody, welcome to Coffee with Closers. Today, I sat down with Mark Zabinski. We talked all about, if you don't know Mark has been doing a ton of great work in the federal employee market for years and years. And so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today has to do with dealing with federal employees, but also is relatable to any industry. If you're in the retirement planning sector, today's your episode. We talked about life insurance, finding a win-win for your clients. We talked about long-term care, annuities, income for life, how to protect for the long term, finding dollars today to fund things, and just maybe even, I think, some speculation stuff on where things are going with products. So hope you enjoy today's episode. If you do, don't forget to subscribe if you're not, and throw a like on the episode. It sure helps. And of course, there's all kinds of show notes in the description. So enjoy. Take care. So yeah, we go with this 10-year horizon. That's the baseline.
Right. The need is there.
And then you start to come down. It's like, okay, well, I've got 200 in my TSP. Great. Keep doing it. Every year it gets better and better. You could go with more like a decreasing term potentially. It's like, I'm independent. I'll sell whatever it is that fits the need of the client. But it goes from 200. Let's say they've got their spouse has a policy that allows them to have insurance too. I've had that a ton of times. Like, oh, my spouse has a life insurance policy. We've got that. Okay, so you got another 100,000 somehow on you. All right, so now there's, really just like 200,000 we're looking for. It's like, well, there might be a need for you to have some permanent, some term, right? The permanent policy it's like it's now or never. There's your urgency cell. It's now or it's worse tomorrow. We wait a few years.
Because of the cost, you mean? It's climbing.
Yeah, costs are going to get up there. Yeah. Permanent makes less and less sense as years go on. But permanent is definitely, and then I start to change it to just an investment strategy. What's going to happen now as you get closer to retirement? Do you know what the strategy should be as you get closer to retirement? What's your thought there? No, yeah, well, I don't know. I guess you're going to want to protect it, right? Put the word right in their mouth. You're going to want to start to protect it. And the problem with that is, where are you going to go to protect it? What are you going to do to protect it? You're going to go to bonds or something like that, right? It depends on their investment acumen, right? But it's like you're going to have very few limited options for protecting your assets.
Under the mattress isn't going to work.
Yeah. So the best scenarios for you is, what do I really need to get more safe for? Why am I getting safer? I'm getting safer because I want to protect against the unforeseen, I want to protect, certainly, for some of it is to take care of my loved one. Make sure there is money for them if something were to happen, to take care of them. If something bad happens to you early in retirement, it's the same thing, but you just don't need life insurance anymore. Not if it's going to be super expensive. So what do? Well, potentially, you get the best of both worlds. You get a life insurance policy now that's much more affordable. That's going to stay that affordability throughout time. And as you get into retirement now, you're able to be much more aggressive with your TSP or whatever assets you have, doing what the market is geared to do best, which is to get returns and reward risk. You get to take, sure, you're going to still want to be a little less risky in retirement, but not so far so that you're robbing yourself of potential returns.
Right.
And that's why I've done this with myself. That's why almost every one of our clients tries to get into a permanent policy. And if not, then we look at other options. And so if I get to that 55-year-old, it's like, look, you don't have enough life insurance. Now it's time to get real safe with your assets. Your life insurance, you have basic only. You've got this thing. You need to, your first action plan is to make sure that these assets are here for the entirety of your retirement. There's a few ways we can do that. Let's talk about the safe money strategy.
What is your experience and your thoughts on this entire conversation? But rather than putting it into whole life or a life insurance product at all, compare the same dollar amount or more, whatever they can afford. But let's just talk about the same dollar amount to have a flexible FIA.
Sure.
So that now we can shoot that same amount. The death benefit's there. It's not ever, so the growth can be the same opportunity with whatever par rates, with whatever. What are your thoughts on that entire idea of a flexible premium FIA? Because I have the question often, more so recently because of my conversations. Well, I have some more money. Do you think I should, once they have some trust in my integrity, do you think I should put more into my TSP? Or if they're younger, I talk about an
Definitely
IUL.
not, you know.
But what, yeah, definitely not there, but at least based on what we're talking about. But what about the difference between permanent life insurance compared to a flexible FIA?
Yeah, no, that I think that's kind of the same principle.
Right.
I would go down the path of like, okay, give me a decreasing term then paired with that FIA.
But if the conversation is investment only,
Oh, then yeah, sure.
if it's investment only, we're trying to decrease the amount of, if it's an IUL even, but we're trying to decrease the amount of death benefit face value in order to overfund, to get the investment there, to have the tax-free
That's
return.
if you're doing the tax-free thing,
Right.
Right, yeah. I rarely sell for the tax-free distribution of assets.
So therefore, FIA flexible premium, if you got $400 to put into let's talk about this.
Yeah, if you've got $400, I don't know if you're familiar with the American Amicable product. They have a product called the Financial Lifeline product. Have you looked at that before?
Yeah, that debacle that I left was doing a lot. So
They
yeah,
tried to do something similar to like
two halves of your premium.
Two halves of your premium, right? I feel like there's some merit to some of that. And because what are you suggesting that you'd give up the opportunity to have enormous death benefit for somebody if they died really early in their career?
Yeah, I guess there's that gap, that
That's
conversation.
that gap.
The gap is that you're buying a lump sum if you die sooner.
Yeah,
compared to
I
how
want
much you're going to. Yeah.
I want that protection for them now. It's like,
yeah.
And so that's where I'd be like, give me the decreasing term that's proportionate towards the growth model on my TSP or
even if
whatever
he's combining some term and some IUL or even the whole life.
I wouldn't even do it. I wouldn't even do a permanent policy if the plan was to really invest money. Like, so give me a safe FIA flexible premium
with a term,
with a decreasing term on top of it. And I'm going to, it don't have to be on top, like part of the same policy, but just in tandem, and show me the growth rate of the FIA with the decreasing of premiums over time.
Kids getting older, they don't need it as much later. Mortgages getting smaller, don't need it as much later.
Yeah, and I would do decreasing premiums. I'd almost set it up to be, no, maybe not. No, as long as level premiums, you're contributing.
It sounds like you don't go there a lot. Like that, is that ever a thought that you?
No, that's a good thought.
I go through that in my head a lot, and I don't know the answer. I don't.
I think you got to find the right flexible premium product.
It's going to take some time to really compare illustrations.
Rates. Yeah, with the best kind of renewal rate integrity.
Sure.
And then you put yourself in a place where you've got yourself a good decreasing term policy out there. And North American is a good one. I think North American's pretty much the term market is so like, but I think North American does a good job of providing living benefits too. Just a nice cherry on top if you're talking with clients.
You know what I could use from you guys, and I'm sure it's available, I just don't know how to access yet, is when I set up a scenario and I have a conversation with a client, what I end up showing them is what brokers sends me as the top 5 or 6. I don't ever know what's behind them for the client compared to someone else that didn't show up on that. So that's just a cost basis or a growth basis, like where the results show up.
Right.
I don't know why you would say North American. I don't have in my head why you would say amicable, why you would say these other. I could use a 30 to 60 minute podcast or a sit down with me taking notes and to know. I know enough how they work.
Do the sit down.
Yeah.
I mean, we could do shows on them, but they'll become dated quickly.
So I could use that 60-minute refresher every quarter to know what's up. Because recently you've done some of these things and you've mentioned some of the carriers that are doing on this podcast.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned some
more brazen about that. Yeah.
About long-term care or about certain ones. And I don't know those reasons. And so I would like to, without trying to study all of them doing my own comparison, you may know those already to tell me the comparison in a 60-minute sit down.
That's sure. That's absolutely. You got to schedule that time and feel free to ask whomever you're talking to, and they'll know somebody that can get you a good answer on those things.
But you have certain things in your head
oh yeah,
that I don't, and I'd like to know. So I don't know.
We can set those calls up anytime you want.
Yeah.
I mean, you call me and, we get a scheduled time. We can jaw jack on, because my affection for North American lies in those living benefits. They're A-rated. They're one of the largest life insurance companies in the country. You're not going to get any like, oh, my client Googled this thing and nightmare.
I used to have that affection with AIG and American General because I was captive with them for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew what their living benefits were about.
Yeah.
And I would talk about them constantly, but I don't know who has surpassed those goals, those same ideas, if it's North American or if it's someone else.
Done that. Whole Life, I like Lafayette. Lafayette's got a great life or whole life product out there. IUL is a tough one. I feel like, I feel like there's just benefits. Like Allianz has a great one. F&G's got a very competitive one as well. You've got, North American's got a competitive IUL, but those three kind of like compete for that IUL space constantly.
F&G always seems to fall in the middle.
Yeah, they're like right in the middle.
Based on results of whatever that, and they're one of the ones that they're probably the only one that I typically see that doesn't show on the summary until you dive into the illustration. They don't show what they're using as an average interest rate for growth. All the other ones show the 4.5 or the 5.5 or the 6.1 or and so when you dive into each illustration, you spend a lot of time doing that. It's necessary, but I would like a summary as to, why I'm looking at certain ones first.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to think that I have enough business that I need to spend less time on studying and more time on already knowing.
I agree. Get it done once. The overarching, like, rates change for sure, and that's unavoidable. You're always gonna have to refresh yourself on that. But the nuts and bolts of the foundation of these products don't ever change. And so that's what I try and just be knowledgeable on, is like make sure I understand the nuts and bolts, the foundations of this, and what the rest of the market's generally offering, like what's the differences, and then I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, the rate's at 6.1 right now for this, or the fixed account is here, or
I feel like my mind is 90-10, and 10's not enough for me to go down that road consistently. Yeah. Because if I'm getting 60% or 59% of my leads on average, should have that conversation. I should not only be 10%.
No, you got it. And like the thing is when you start working those appointments and you know that every appointment's going to be going well, it changes your whole mindset on everything. And you're so sharp on just this conversation, having these talks with federal employees. Not that you're not, obviously, after so many years working in the federal space, but
it's annuity focused.
Eventually, it's like, I find advisors that are so well-rounded and like are selling everything. They end up in this place of like, I've got a million stories, and stories sell.
Sure.
Right? It's got a million stories. Like, here's this story of so-and-so that happened, and this is what happened to them. And, and one feeds the other, right? So it's like, okay, well, I'm talking life insurance with this person, but it's nothing at the end of that to start talking to them about the referral source right then. Like, so, I was trained that the second you close on a deal, that's when the prospect is the most happy about you. It's like they just bought a brand new car. You're going to show everybody this new car you just bought. 3 months later, you're not showing anybody that car. It's just, you're numb to it now.
Sure.
It's the same scenario. I'm going to ask for that referral right then and there. And it's like, I've got stories. Hey, look, for you, this was the right play, everything like that. But look, it doesn't stop there. I don't know if you have folks that are, in that retirement realm, but the most important conversations to be having are the people like you that didn't feel, how you felt like you weren't trained well and you didn't know these benefits that you had very well. That's not an uncommon thing. And for you, it's a solvable thing. We had a conversation. You're going to be on the right path now. You've got 20 years of career left. You're going to be just fine. For somebody that's a little bit older age, closer to retirement, I don't know if you have folks. You probably have some folks at work, right? 4 or 5 years from retirement. Do you know them? Yeah. Those people need my help more than anybody. And if you like what happened today, please, it helps my business grow, helps us continue to help more and more federal employees. Spread the good word. Let me know of a few people that I can help.
Since COVID, I've been more and more, I've been talking again now about how many people, what's the average age of people around you? Oh, I'm the only one that's ready to retire. There's so many people that are in their 30s that have is there a supervisor there that you could let me talk to, because they need to know some of these pieces of the puzzle, so that if there's 17 of them that have that idea. So I'm trying to get it in person.
The more ways
I'll fly there and talk to them.
The more ways you can do that, the better.
Yeah.
Because life insurance, there was a guy who was instrumental in getting Megastar to where we are now in the federal space. Instrumental. Was a guy named Brad Pate. And, say what you will about the guy. He is a fantastic life insurance salesman. Taught me pretty much everything I know about the life insurance conversation. He would go to on-site events, talk about life insurance, and he said, if you're going to sell life insurance, you got to have a lot of people ready to buy. He's like, the more people you can, pitch at the same time, the better.
Right.
And so he would go out into these events, and the majority of the presentation would be surrounded about life insurance because he knew those rules. It was like, on average, 70% of my audience, 60% of my audience is going to be in that life insurance world.
And then capture them one-on-one.
Yeah.
After the general idea.
And he's like, and I'm not going to get the people, because he made it not about just talking about getting outside life insurance. He made it more about, let's see if we can get rid of life insurance altogether, and that FEGLI might not be the best result. That we all need life insurance. We all need protection against this thing. Some of you will be able to protect your assets. Some of you will be able to, or are going to need to buy life insurance, whether that be with FEGLI or with an outside policy. Every one of you should be having a plan of how you're going to take care of your loved one if you pass away. And the audience couldn't disagree with that. Right. So what happened was he'd go in, and that's where we kind of made the whole sales process around the life insurance conversation, because it's so easy to just go right into the annuity conversation. If it's like, well, you're 55 and you've got $700,000 in your TSP, and you're potentially going to have to pay outrageous amounts for this group life insurance if you continue it. What's the plan? Are we going to keep this policy, or are you going to try and get rid of it? Well, I don't know. After what you're saying today, I feel like I need to keep it. It's like, well, maybe not. Potentially you kill two birds with one stone. Life insurance is really for those that die too young without a lot of assets. You've got a lot of assets, considerably, considering you're living on $60,000, $70,000 a year, and you've got 10x that right here. That's pretty much the status quo for life insurance, 10 years protection. So what if we just made some strategic moves and protected these assets to make sure they aren't going anywhere? Right? And that might be the most important thing, is yes, we're going to drain from this pot a little bit as we retire, but we need to make sure that we're not draining so much and taking on risk to where potentially we drive ourselves into a place where we can't even protect a loved one if something bad were to happen. So,
but if they're 55, where's that conversation going to happen for 4.5 years?
It's like, we've got to get prepped for this. Potentially we start on a decreasing term scenario with the plan to do this. And that was another thing that was taught to me at another age. Is like, no matter what, we do the whole plan, whether they're 20 or like 35 or something like that. Maybe I don't go into as much detail with a 35-year-old about the overall plan by the time they're retired. But if they're 55, I might sell them a life insurance policy, but I'm also selling them what we're going to do at 59.
Right, to bridge the gap for 5 years.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Right, so we get a 5-year term policy. This is going to cover this, but in 4.5 years, we're going to be sitting down getting a plan together, because at 59.5, that's when our major home run happens. This is when the bases are loaded. We're going to hit a grand slam right here, because again, you're in the prime position. Government says it's time at 59.5. The rule exists because why? That's when we're supposed to start retirement planning. We're supposed to start moving our money around, getting it situated in the right place for us. That's why they gave you this option. It's time to do it. So at 59.5, we're going to sit down. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to move assets in a way that makes sense for us to get rid of all the life insurance we have, protect our assets from downside risk, but still get a good upside return. Have a plan for an income stream in retirement to guarantee ourselves all of the same life expectancies or same life qualities that we're accustomed to today, and set ourselves on Easy Street, but eliminating a ton of costs.
And bridge the gap, and with that 5-year term, but to make sure that we're going to transition properly at 59.5.
5-year term is like a tiny little policy, and it's like, it's not going to do much for us, and I'm not going to get rich off of that. But I just made a client
transfer from savings to protection,
Yep.
and then to distribution, and got to bridge
And
it.
they're going to be my client in 5 years. I am their guy now. I'm their federal benefits guy. I helped them with this one thing with their FEGLI, but they're committing to the long-term plan. They're not committing to, and I'd argue that every producer that watches the show is not just trying to make a sale and leave. They're trying to be there for their clients throughout retirement if they can.
Right.
And so, okay, well,
And they're not paying a brokerage fee to be there.
no, I'm not charging them to be even if I don't sell the life insurance policy that day, I'm still considering them a client.
Sure.
Right?
They have someone to turn to.
Yeah, I'm your
knows
guy.
the Fed benefits.
Look, you're gonna, as a client of ours. Look, I know we're not buying anything, but you're a client of ours now, right? You're a federal employee, yes. Well, it's nothing for you to be a part of the borrowless tax team. You know, you can reach out to us. We're federal benefits experts throughout. We'll have an annual meeting each year from now until your retirement date. And then, you know, we'll go more like a semi-annual basis where you'll come in twice a year and we'll make sure that we're on the right place, on the right path. Oh yeah, great. That sounds so good. And I schedule an appointment for a year from now. If I didn't make a sale that day, I've got a reason to come back. Hey, good to see you.
Yep.
You know, like that's what a good business owner does, is like make them feel part of the crew.
Sure.
And that was like the old tax model. The old tax model was like that. I don't know if are you familiar with the tax model at all?
No.
The old tax model used to be, I'll do your taxes every year, and eventually, you know, you're part of my crew as a everybody needs to
Sure.
get their taxes done. I'll do
Right.
a cut
You have a
rate
plumber,
thing.
you have an attorney, you have an electrician.
Yeah.
Now you've got a tax guy.
You got a tax guy. I'll do your taxes. I charge you a cut rate thing for the market, so nobody, you know, is gonna steal you from me. And yeah, I run it at either a loss or I run it at break even as a business, and it's my feeder for my financial practice.
Sure.
So I do those taxes every year, and then it's nothing for me to sit down as the owner of the tax practice and say, hey, you know, we really think, you know, we've been looking at your return for the last few years. We really think you should sit down and we should do some planning, because you could be saving some money in taxes. You're not doing enough right now. And it's my client. They've known me for years now. Of course they're going to, you know, so it's the same idea with the Fed stuff. Is I need to make them feel like they're my client, so that when I reach out to them about coming in for our financial planning meeting, they're not like, what are you trying to sell me? It's like, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I've been giving you pro bono advice for 4 years.
Right.
Right.
And that's the same idea with the tax person. Is when it was federal only for me, when I made that transition, then I wasn't always able to connect with CPAs to be able to make it another source, because they don't only work with federal employees. In fact, they may have none. So that cut off a source for me compared to when I was captive.
For sure.
But yeah, I relate to what you're talking about for sure.
So it was 4 years ago you got into the federal space?
16 is when it first focused, and I started going on some trips,
A little longer.
postal only,
Yeah.
into 17. And
Okay.
then from that point forward, it's been federal. Yeah.
Yeah. And why federal? Why did you do that?
They're completely underserved.
Yeah.
There's
Did
never
you just notice it one day? Or
um,
like, did you have a
it was
client
brought
that
to my
came in?
attention through the postal side of things, because they don't have, well, first of all, it's been years now, but back then it was a recent transition from, they didn't have HR local anymore. So everything went to shared services. And so it's in Greensboro, North Carolina for the entire country. You can't walk down the hall anymore. You can't hardly even get somebody on the phone. And if you do, they're not trained for everything that you're asking about.
Right.
So there was a need for sure. And then as there was some VA and DOD and USDA and others trickling in, I found out how underserved they really were, and made that my focus. Because, you know, if somebody's out there focusing only on entertainers, or they're focused only on, you know, athletes and all these high dollar, you know, looking for the elephant and the whale, then they're missing some of the people that are looked at as not a focus. And I didn't see nearly as many people that are going after the federal market whatsoever. In addition to the idea that when you do, if it's a client that you're going to be rolling money, there is no conservation efforts.
Yeah.
There's never a time where, you know, if you go to TIA or you go to Fidelity,
it's they're going to fight for it.
big difference. Yeah. It's just a matter of waiting, you know, 2 to 4 weeks to get it, rather than fighting through those
It's not even just
30
that.
to 90
like,
days.
It's like, I hated when we would do like Social Security workshops, it's like every single appointment that I'd sit down with, it's like, yeah, I was just at an event. We've been to a few of these over the last few weeks, you know, and I hated when conversations started off like that. It's like I'm right out the gate on the back foot.
right.
And it was such a stark difference. when you sat in front of a federal employee and you were like, so have you started the planning process? Have you got, no,
Don't know
no,
anything
I'm just
about it.
getting into it. No, nothing. They, most of the time. And then, you start to talk to them for a few months and it's like, I have no idea. They don't even know that they're getting a pension and a TSP. And
Right. They think it's the same thing.
they think it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, but the big issue, like that was the big contrast to me. It was just, sure, the conservation effort was one thing, but the other thing was just, if they were opening the doors to like seeking new advice, they were seeking it to like all of my competitors down the street too.
Sure.
And I was dealing with that competition. Not that we were necessarily losing those battles. It was just another headache that we had to deal with over and over and over again. And I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. No, it's completely different when you're talking about a federal employee who doesn't have someone to go to, and now they're reliant. I have people checking in with me every year because they're comfortable with the conversation and they want to know what the updates are. Or sometimes they get an email from you and what does this really mean? From FIBA. That's I don't understand what that's saying. I'll get a couple of those calls from time to time, even though it's been more recent. All the changes that have happened from the Modernization Act of 2017 all the way through COVID, and then until now, they have someone to lean on. And as young or as old as they are, they tend to keep coming back to somebody that gives them answers. They don't have to pay for it, and they're accurate answers. And they're making sure that they can lean on somebody to get an answer, or if they hear something at the water cooler or somebody else is struggling with an idea,
verify it with you.
Yeah, it could be as old as some civil service people, almost 40 years in now, to someone that started a few weeks ago because they're struggling with the information. The HRs, it's not their fault, but they're not trained. There's no funding. They don't have the information. And so to give them some type of exit strategy conversation early in their career, or even mid, or even when it's soon to be retirement time, the HR people are typically not trained to give them the right information. And so it's just so refreshing. And normally they roll into another conversation, excuse me, because they don't have all the right documents, all the right statements that we might need.
Yep.
They don't have the account on SSA.gov yet. So we want to find out what that supplement might look like. Don't even know about the supplement 10 minutes before that. And it rolls into just an integrity and trust conversation so that they can lean on it later.
There's so much like found money. I feel like every time, or I do feel like a lot of advisors will go into a situation trying to show a shortage of cash that ends up being, they're going to fill that gap or something like that. One target. And I found a lot more success, at least in selling annuities, in the fact of found money, like finding a ton of, like showing them, hey, look, no, you're going to get this pension amount too. And then you've got this TSP asset here, and we're going to eliminate the cost here of the group life insurance, and we're going to do this other thing. And so, it's okay for us potentially to be a little safer in our investment strategy, not like reach for the stars of a 20% return all the time, especially when I'm dealing with guys that are looking for 20% returns all the time. They're like, oh, I'm going to, I've been making great returns in the C fund and I'm 100% in C and everything like that. It's like, okay, listen, have you went and thought about just the goals and the game that you're playing right now, potentially? We have a lot of success. I know, Jacob, about the conversations we've had with, that one slide that we do where we're talking about the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go years. And when people you've heard that from Hagna, right?
Sure.
And so what we do a really good job about in the appointment process is pointing out that if you are one of those guys that is solely funding in the C fund or just exposed to market risk, right? Super exposed to the health of the American economy, that if so happens that the 2008 happens, or maybe even just a lesser version of that, right? We have this world of like, when's enough? Right? It's like I've got $1 million, and let's say that $1 million is going to be more than I ever need in retirement. The second it dips down to 700,000, you'd probably still fine to retire, but a lot of people are like, well, I'll just wait till it gets back to $1 million and then I'll retire. Mm-hmm. And they don't have any cognizance of the fact that they're just robbing themselves of really what retirement, our vision of retirement is, which is just those first 4 or 5 years of retirement, the precious years of where I get to go and experience everything. My health is good enough for me to do those things. And it's like the majority of retirement's not that. And so if you skip a bunch of years because you were too exposed to the outcomes of the market, you put yourself in a place where it's like you're going to kick the can down the road. I know who you are. You're going to kick your can down the road, and you're going to waste 2, 3, 4 years of the 5, and your retirement's going to be a lot less exciting than you think it is.
Sure. And you're less active, and
You're less
the grandkids
active, yeah.
aren't as new, and everything kind of fades. And what was most important,
Yeah.
the reason why you wanted to retire right away, not just because you're tired of what you were doing,
Yeah.
but you're ready to do something else and truly live your life. And so from that first decade, 5 to 10 years, and then the second decade and the third decade, we're living longer now. So
Yeah,
it makes a huge difference. If you've got that money, like you're saying, later in life, we're not even able to use it for as many things. So
Yeah.
I do focus in my conversation more on those first 10 years after retirement.
What do you need?
Not
Like,
just
let's-
because of the stories that
Right.
we hear that so many people pass away when they're done working,
Mhm.
but the activity stops. There's not as much golf, not as much travel. The
Yeah.
grandkids are older. They're focused on different things. There's, in a different retirement community potentially. And, no more
because
pickleball.
That's really what it is. It's like you're going to go into retirement. You're going to travel for a few years because you haven't really gotten to experience long-term travel, right? And you've always been on these vacations and done 3-day stints or 2 days, but you're like, let's spend a month in Italy,
Right.
and like finally you have the luxury to do that sort of thing. But you get that out of your system in maybe 2-3 years. And then you come back and you play a little more golf. You're feeling good. You're out, doing whatever. But now you're back with the kids or whatever. But the kids now are much more grown. If that's 62 and you had your kids in your late 20s, that means those kids are probably in middle school or even into high school. That's when friends start coming in,
Sure.
And so once the friends start coming in, we know how that goes. As parents, they're gone. The kids are, they don't want anything to do with the older generations, and so they don't want to spend the time. Like my
That's
kids are in that 3 years old range, and they want to see grandparents every day, and they're like kings. They're superheroes when they walk in the door, and you see my parents and my wife's parents. They melt for it. And you're gonna miss all of those if you just keep working, or you're gonna miss a good chunk of that time.
Or if they're not local, if you're not lucky enough for them to be
yeah.
local because your kids have moved away because of better
Yeah.
opportunities, all of a sudden now travel doesn't only mean Italy. It means,
it means
going
I wanna
4 states
stay
later,
down there.
and can you do it? Or do you have to come back to that dreaded Monday that
Such a
you're
good
more
point.
tired on that following Monday because you can only spend a week away? And if it's a
So
flight
good.
or if it's, time away, you were as active as you could. And now you
Yeah.
come back and you need a break from the break.
It's so true. And in that reason only, it's like, okay, let's figure out what you actually need, and let's try and guarantee as much of that as we possibly can, so that you don't have to ever worry about, like, can I retire now? It's an easy equation.
Yeah. Lock it in. Make sure that it's going to be there.
Do you think you could live on 100,000 for the rest of your life?
And many
Oh,
people
yeah.
think they're going to close it. So if we move, someone's 60, 59 plus, and the initial conversation, they feel like that means, oh, my TSP is gone when we move it. As we continue that conversation, they realize they're still going to get the free 5%. You're still going to continue to contribute. You're going to have something
Yeah.
for the next 2 to 5 years that you work or whatever it might be to continue building that.
How do you
but you're
address-
going to keep that.
How do you address that liquidity concern? Like, what is your,
Just-
like,
Well,
like
I
when
want to
people-
lock something in, just like you said. I want to
Yeah.
keep something safe. So if it's 250, if it's 650,
Yeah.
let's make sure that that's going to be locked in. It's going to be safe. We can continue to move. Do you stay aggressive? Do you stay moderate or conservative with? That's up to you with the remaining amount, but we can bring it to a zero balance, never close it. They still continue to give the 5% match for sure. If you're giving that 10 or 12 or 15 or more, that's going to continue to grow. We'll make a decision on what that amount is as we continue our conversations over those next few years. But let's lock this in. Let's make sure that $500,000 is going to be there for you, regardless of what the market and economy's health even does. And then let's see some growth with it too. So they don't know that that's possible. And when we talk about moving it, the majority of the people that I talk to, they think it's gone. I mean, it's only a moment later until they find out different. But in their head, they never thought about moving it at the younger age of 59 or so if they're going to work longer, because they think moving it means shutting it off, shutting it down.
That's probably right. That's probably exactly right. Honestly, I don't know that I've thought of it that way, but that is probably the apprehension immediately of why they don't even think about it. Because as advisors, we kind of get numb to it. It's like everybody should be aware at 59 and a half. That's when you start moving stuff around, but it's not.
why did I never hear of this is the conversation that follows it. Why have I never heard of it? It sounds too good to be true. Lock it in, still get the growth, but never have the downside risk. Why haven't I heard this?
Yeah.
So my conversation goes to, when there's financial planners that, are charging the broker fees and all, I'm a safe money guy. And so I'm not looking to move money into the market. You can keep with a lower fee, you can keep it in the C fund. You can have that if that's what you were looking for.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about safety, we want to make sure it's going to be there. It's not going to shut it down. We're just going to move that piece. That's your growth period for the last 25 to 30 years. You're going to work a couple more years potentially. So we'll continue to grow that. That's not going to close it, but it will make sure that we can see some growth. Why haven't I heard it before? A couple of reasons. Because it's not under assets under management. So a financial planner that you may have talked to or others that have one that gave you some side advice aren't going to talk about it because it's not how they make their money.
All right.
It doesn't make them bad people, but it's the industry that doesn't talk about that, even if they are aware of it, because there's never a time where it's going to put food on their table.
Yep.
But instead, so that along with the idea that if I move it, I think that I'm losing my TSP by moving it, that takes that conversation a whole lot further. And then we make sure that we have dive into that a whole lot deeper.
I do have like some folks out there that'll go in with, I've heard them on the call, like their first thing is like, if you could lock in your gains right now for the rest of your life, like, would you be cool with that?
Sure.
It is, you've got 500,000 in your TSP. And if I could say, right now, you could lock that in forever. Would you make that move? Because obviously, you can continue to contribute into a fresh account, right? So you can continue to keep doing what you've done to this point.
Right.
But like, if you could take the money from the table right now, you got to look at this TSP as kind of like a up and down thing, right? We know that you've been in it for 20 years now as an employee. It's gone up and down, and generally up. But if I said like, hey, yeah, we could lock this in and you'd be good. And then we could take that money off the table. We could play just with interest from here on out. Would you do it? And, sometimes the guys are like, yeah, or no. But either way, you get to the idea of like how they feel as an investor. Like, are they cautious or not? And generally with those people in the G fund, they're like, well, that's why I'm in the G fund.
Right. And the conversation, my experience, especially with the hangover of the 10 of the last 12 years has been so strong. The market was the strongest it's been in a string of 10 years that we're still thinking that if we move it, I'm going to lose that idea or that potential. If somebody's out there still riding on the idea that it's really, really good. Yeah, I've seen some decreases in the last year and a half, but they're still riding the idea that if I move it, I'm going to lose that. They don't know of what the fixed index annuity can do for them with protection and still keep the growth. But the idea is still, if you hadn't thought of it, that I'm really seeing, and maybe we don't speak of it enough. Those of us that even do this, we don't speak of the fear of moving means it's shutting it down. And so we go into that conversation, but too many times people think that moving it means that I'm going to have to sacrifice instead of it truly is going to give me more benefit. Because it's either up or flat.
I find that too. And I find that people also aren't aware of how the rest of folks are doing in the market too. So they almost feel like whatever they're doing, federal or not, but let's just say it's a federal employee, that they're doing well over the last 10 years better than others because of the TSP. And I find like a lot of it is like, I have to almost show them or convince them. And it's like, look, you're not doing any better than anybody else has done. TSP has not cracked any code.
Right.
These are as basic a funds as they can exist in the world. Here's the returns for the last 10, 12 years of the Vanguard S&P 500 index. Same thing, right? And you'll see them like within a very, very, very small margin of each other.
Sure.
And they're like almost shocked by that. It's like, you can do this, exactly what you have out there, and not be hamstrung by all these other rules.
When I highlight that, sometimes they point to the fees. If someone was doing something on their own, I'm paying so much less fees. So
that's why I pick Vanguard, though. That's why I go with Vanguard as a comparison, because you're not going to get me on fees there.
Right. And so they think, so once it's kind of proven just through a trust conversation that the TSP didn't crack a code, but instead the same S&P is available even on a private, IRA somewhere out there. The S&P is going to grow or not grow equally, but you've got this less than 1% fee that you're paying to the TSP, and that's kind of where they go. Well, what about paying no broker fee? And you walk toward that.
Yeah.
That whole conversation.
And that was another thing. David Connor, I don't know if you've ever seen videos, but we've interviewed him a few times. His approach to the whole fee structure thing is there must be, there's value to fees when somebody's managing your funds. You could justify that to him. This is what he says. Like, somebody could sit here and justify to me a 1% fee on a managed account. Somebody could. But when we start talking about bond holdings and safe money strategies that are there designed to sit and basically hold to the yield, hold to full term, there's not a lot of strategy here. And you're telling me that you're going to pay the same fee for that as you are for the guy that's doing all the hedging over here in the market and all the research of the ups and downs and when something coming, and he's just supposed to get a 1% fee for riding a fixed rate of 3% for 10 years or something like that? That's where it starts to misalign. And so my portfolio is a little bit different. We would charge you a fee for the managed accounts, but for all your safe money strategies, we don't charge you a thing.
Right.
And so he goes down the path of the fixed indexed annuity, gives us all the benefit of a safe money strategy with the same types of returns, but we don't have to charge you a fee of anything. It's just safe money.
And if there is a fee, it's not a broker fee to just simply manage, but instead it's going to give you some
sort of outrageous benefit.
Lifetime income, a doubler if you
high
suffer
death
something.
Benefit, some sort of increased earnings potential.
10 years of a roll-up somewhere, for a
and
percentage to build that lifetime income balance. So there's a fee that's going to give you some extra rather than someone just kind of overseeing what's happening, not only with your money, but they're overseeing the market and then anybody that's their client. So it's not a focused effort at all, but it's the way that they're going to make sure that they bring money into their practice, but there is another way.
You obviously have talked a ton about group life insurance and you obviously do a ton of annuity, but did you catch at all any of the long-term care conversations that we've been having?
Yes.
And have you looked at any long-term care? Like, do you even incorporate that in your conversation with them?
Not licensed to do it. And when I do incorporate it, when it comes up because someone asks about it, or if I bring it up, it's to do a comparison, and I call it the little brother, which is just the annuity doubler, that's out there, that's available. If you've looked into it, if you've heard of it, if you understand what it's about, how high cost it is, you can't even get it until 50, and then the price is so high ongoing, that if you haven't gotten it, it's certainly not long-term care, but here's a substitute. If you suffer accident, illness, injury, there's an opportunity to, even if you haven't started lifetime income yet, and if and when that ever happens to you, they'll look at what that income would have been and double it, and then it'll roll. And I like the F&G story because I didn't know this until I got it from an F&G person, because so many shut it off at 2 or 3 or 5 years.
Right.
At least that's what I understand. But F&G goes for life, and then if it runs the balance out, then it just reverts back to the standard lifetime income.
Yeah, which generally is like 5 years or so. I've seen 5, 7 in that area. It seems like it runs
until they pass away. You mean, or until it runs out?
Until it runs back and reverts back. Yeah.
Haven't seen that scenario yet because I haven't seen when someone's actually runs out.
Well, I mean, just an illustration.
Oh, got it.
Just an illustration. If you show
them taking some income later,
and
then it doubles,
and you can see. I believe there's like a whole nother page where you can actually see the doubler coming. Maybe it's just the last column. You see the doubler coming out for that amount of years, and you see it revert back. It ends up being like 5, 7, which is more than enough time. You know what I mean? Sure. That's generally the stint.
Of how long they survive. You mean in long term or in a facility?
I got an interview coming up with a group of guys that have a software. And the software does a really great job. It's a 1-pager output. Like the rest of the software is all about life expectancy, and it does some kind of minor underwriting of the client in your fact finding, and then puts out a report that suggests, hey, this is your care span. So your lifespan and your care span. Your care span is like when long-term care will kick on for your spouse. The gap between your spouse dying and your long-term care scenario starting up, and then your long-term care scenario. So it outlines as like, hey, look, based on what we see right now and modern science, we project potentially your gap to be about 12 years longer than your husband.
Based on some actuary tables.
Based on actuary tables.
Stints in the
they've got some
long-term care.
pretty cool technology. You'll see the episodes coming up. It's pretty neat. But they've got a cool tech. They do some qualifying questions. They even take a selfie picture of the person, and it uses that face to create an age of or a longevity age, what you're going to probably live till.
Yeah.
And then it uses family health history to gauge potential long-term care scenarios. Like, where would you find yourself in a place where you might need a doubler or something like that? And so it's like, okay, 10 years, you're going to live a little longer than your spouse, right? But the 3 years prior to that 10-year stint, your spouse is going to be in a long-term care scenario where they are draining those assets. So it shows like this red area where, the husband is in long-term care, draining assets. And then now you're on your own for 10 years, not 2 years, not 3 years. You're on for a decade.
Right.
And it kind of shows them in like this, very emotionally driven, like, oh my gosh, that's 10 years. That's a long time to be without my spouse. And then at the end of that 10 years of you living on your own, you will have to have been financially responsible enough to have paid for or kept yourself protected enough to have money for your own long-term care stint, which for you, Mrs., will not be the 3 years your husband was accustomed to. Will be more like 5 years in a long-term care stint.
The statistics are showing.
Statistics will
based
show.
in these numbers.
Right. And so for most, they don't have the money for that last long-term care scenario for most. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that the long-term care goes unpaid. It means that for most folks, their children take on the expense for mom.
Mm-hmm.
Mom's in a tough spot. She doesn't have anybody. She's got a long-term care.
Or they're looking for the
stint.
Subsidy.
They're looking for
because everything's drained, or they had to drain it first.
Exactly. And so everything's drained, and now, the kids are trying to come out of pocket to help pay these bills off or help you in any financial way they can, or try and even just avoid the long-term care scenario altogether. You move in with them, whatever. And with a few short, simple moves, now that we know this, we can move a couple things around so that this is always taken care of.
Right.
Or the majority of it is taken care of, to where your assets. So not only is the spouse not, because most spouses are like, okay, well, I'll live a few years longer than my husband. No, this is a long time, a long period potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then you add on, most of the time the men are not only is the wife statistically going to live longer life, but oftentimes too, the wife is a little bit younger than the spouse as well. Right. And so people don't always think about that. It's like, okay, well, if we're both 60, then she might live to 88 and I might live to 86 or so, just on average. But if I'm 80, or if I'm 60 and she's 55, by the time she hits 60, I'm already, well into this bracket. And then, by the time I pass away, not only does she have the 3 years statistically that she's going to live a little longer than me, she's also got the 5 years she was younger than me on top that she's going to go. That's 8 years without me that I'm needing to pay for.
Sure. And that's a conservative number of 3 years.
That's conservative.
It's
conservative.
Actually 7.
It's gotten much longer.
Right, yeah.
And I was talking on the show just recently about that article I was reading. It was like they're prolonging life, and the majority of those years end up being these kind of the no-go years they're hanging on to. You're clinging on. Medical sciences, these marginal gains are all helping us just live a little longer, sicker.
I saw that, yeah.
And that was an interesting kind of eureka moment for me of like, this is a conversation we need to be having more of. And I feel like the field is coming back to that conversation, because it wasn't just my interest going there. It was like so many people I was talking to were having that conversation. And, it's a sobering and a heavy moment for sure, but
since that podcast, I've had that conversation 3 times that I'd never brought up before.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, because it did bring up an idea that not only, if all things being equal, they're going to live long, the wife's going to live longer, but when there's all things are not equal based on age or family history.
Yeah.
But the fact that everything we're talking about, the longevity piece, is normally the no-go years anyway.
Exactly.
And so, to front load whatever we're talking about, if there's a piece of disposable income, is it going to go to life insurance plan and the ideas of a combination of term and whole life or IUL or whatever that needs to be compared to a flexible FIA that we talked about? Or is it long-term care or what pieces? How much flexible income do we have?
Sincere long-term care insurance is just one hard thing to buy. Not a hard thing to sell necessarily, a hard thing to buy as a consumer. I'm like looking at it, it's like such a long-term thing and such an if and such a no recourse option thing, and, life insurance potentially, some sort of dual benefit, somehow kill two birds with one stone, whether it be with life insurance or annuities. Like we've got to figure that out better as advisors than go straight to the long-term care insurance. I don't think that there's a need for that necessarily.
Is this thought process forcing us to create some return of premium long-term care product?
I'm sure there's probably something like it out there. I just, for most of the people we talk to, just with some simple movement, some conservative nature to their investment strategy, you can kill those two birds, like with an F&G product like that. And for those that are younger, the long-term care conversation becomes, or that longevity conversation, your wife potentially living that much longer than you and having a long-term care expense, like that's the reason for the whole life policy today, not the long-term, not the term. I know you want the term policy because it's cheaper. Trust me, this is worth it in that simple scenario. Just if you pass away, let's say you have a doubler feature on your F&G product. Let's say I set it up that way down the road. You're going to be happy that'll cover your long-term care scenario, but there will be likely not much left over in that policy afterwards to help you protect your spouse and your spouse's income for the next 8 to 10 years potentially, and then their long-term care stint afterwards.
Right, as a beneficiary.
As a beneficiary. What you could have is set that F&G product up and have a whole life policy on top. That's the reason for having both, is because you're protecting some income need for your spouse that's going to live a lot longer potentially than you and have a long-term care stint of their own. Let's give them all the cash they need. And what I'll do with that at death benefit is roll that money into an F&G type scenario to provide them lifetime income and do a doubler of their own. It's the same kind of thing.
Sure. And in the whole conversation, there's only so much. Everyone you're talking with, there's only so much disposable income. So as we're looking at those years beyond retirement, is some or all of that money going to long-term care? Is some or all of that money going to a whole life or some life insurance strategy? Is some or all of that money going toward another piece of investment to make sure we get the doubler?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what I'm always up against in my conversations is there's a certain amount of money that we haven't even arrived at yet. But once we get there, it seems to me like more times than not, if anyone has any knowledge of that I'm talking to of why you need long-term care, it seems like that's the one that falls short from the money that's limited. Where do we spend it? If it's not on long-term care, I have found in those conversations, it's because that subsidy is almost in the back of people's mind that they know it's there. So if it has to happen, the government can bail me out there. Because if my assets go away, there's still something that particular spouse, whoever's surviving, can still live on.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it's a good plan, but it means it's something there compared to not having it there, I guess. And it seems like they lean on that.
They do. And then some states too are even fighting it on top. Like Washington State has like a long-term care feature now too as well. But I just think that all indications are that this is going to rob you of your ability. If not the second spouse, your first spouse is going to rob the coffers for any sort of living for the spouse thereafter. Even if it is that after that, and they find themselves, like the wife finds themselves in a scenario, then they get that bailout there. You don't want it to be where you rob it and then your wife is now left with the pieces for the rest of their healthy life, right? And they might have 8 healthy years beyond your grave.
And that scenario seems to be, the what if you talked about. It's always kind of like, the homeowner's insurance. You have to have it, but you hope you don't have to use it. Yeah. So if you have long-term care insurance or that piece is covered, it seems like, it gets to a point where
It's like an umbrella policy. Like, can I get it in an umbrella policy where it's like, can I cover my house and my auto in the same policy?
right, where's the blend? How do I get everything covered is the story. And many times there may not be an answer. Yeah.
I think it is like that let's kill these two birds. Let's get it. Do you have a bundle or an umbrella policy right now? Like, or if I told you that you could cover your house, your car, and your life all in one policy, would you do it? The same premium payment. Okay, great. That's what we're talking about right now. Let's insure our lifetime income and let's cover our long-term care costs in the same premium.
Right. And there's so much if it does happen to one of us, is there this strong possibility that it will happen to both of us? Well, there's the family history, there's my age, there's my own health going on right now. So long-term care is the what if anyway. Mm-hmm. And now if you're talking about both, it almost seems like we're someone's dozing off in the conversation, not so to speak, but we have to have two what ifs, two triple plays in the same game.
Yeah.
Has to happen.
That's what people want, is like just a win-win for them. It's like, yep, you find me the dollars, I'll do it all day long. Right. I feel like I'm never just selling life insurance on death benefits, like death benefit and something. Annuities, same kind of thing. Annuity, lifetime income and protection.
Right. Why else would it be better to move if it doesn't offer something extra?
Give me something more than what I'm getting right now.
That's right.
Anyway, all good stuff, man. Thanks for doing this. This is obviously great help to a lot of people, but you're doing so good. And then, we didn't even get a chance to talk about LinkedIn stuff. Next time you're coming down, we got to talk about LinkedIn strategy, because a lot of the stuff you're doing on LinkedIn obviously has been inspiring to myself, but it's just impressive. I mean, really impressive.
Yeah, just to guide more, for sure. I've run into it by happenstance, growing things organically, but learning more about it. So, we'll do that again.
All right, good stuff. All right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.